Welcome.
Good afternoon.
Hope everyone can hear us fine, and glad to be here with you. I'm going to scoot this back. I see that peeking just a little bit. But here we are again on our daily, weekly Stomp
Did you do that on purpose?
No, I didn't. We were just having a joke about it. But,
joking with Gavin.
But we're going through the story and just kind of a little podcast to kind of help walk through it. And today's kind of a fun one because we're going to go through the book of Ruth. It's fun because it's short and easy, and it's a great story, and a lot of practical things to talk about.
Exactly. So after a couple weeks when me and Alive, we were just trying to book it through and catch just little pieces of things.
Yeah.
Now we're like, we can talk about everything.
We can almost cover the whole story, and it's only 4 pages. I mean, it was a 5-minute read, if that, to go through the whole chapter. So
I'm sure there's still 1,000-page commentaries that have been written, though.
Yes, I can promise you that. We're dressed in black, not because it's Black Thursday or anything like that, but we had the funeral service for Ruth Thoman. That'd be the mother of Mike Thoman, grandmother of Laura Trulock, and we were able to honor her and share the good news of the Lord with her family and the friends. And so that was an honor to be part of that. But if you see Mike and Laura, thoughts and prayers certainly with them.
Pass on your condolences.
Yep, absolutely. But wanted to make sure we had time also for this. And I don't know if you know the Book of Ruth. It's a great. You could sit down and read it through the actual Bible if you know. It skips out on just a few things, actually.
Exactly. The story doesn't miss much.
It doesn't miss much, but it misses some interesting parts. But yeah, we're going to just kind of try to walk through it.
Okay.
And the story is great because you have Naomi, right? And Naomi has 2 sons. And their names are and she has a husband. Her husband is Elimelech, and her sons are only named like once or twice.
But I'm trying to remember the.
Sorry.
Mahlon and Chilion.
There you go.
It's really sad. I mean, Ruth, Naomi, those are common names from the book, but no one ever names their kids Mahlon or Chilion. Maybe it's because they died.
Right. So the problem is, Elimelech, that would be Naomi's husband.
Yes.
Passes away. But not only that, but Mahlon
and
Chilion, they also pass away. So then you're left with these Ruth or Naomi and her 2 daughter-in-laws, whose names
they're in the foreign land.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not in their homeland of the Israelites or Hebrews or.
And Ruth is a Moabite, so they've gone to Moab to escape a famine.
Right. Where else do you see Moabites? So think about this, if you will. Moabites you see them throughout the scriptures.
They're oftentimes the enemies of God's people.
Sometimes they're but isn't that where Moses went? Was that not the Moabites?
Oh.
Isn't Jethro a Moabite?
Is he a Moabite priest? That could be.
I think he is. But we'll have to
you keep going.
It's your son's namesake.
I know.
Did you name your son after a Moabite? Oh my goodness.
Midian.
A Midianite. Same thing. Whatever. Nope. But anyways, long story short, they're not people of the Israelites, and so you have Ruth, and then I like to say Oprah, but it's Orpah, and you have Orpah. Those are the 2 daughter-in-laws. So they married good Israelite faithful people, right? But that is not of their culture.
Yeah, no.
But it is of Naomi's culture. So okay, just make sure we all have this. You have Naomi.
Right.
Her husband Elimelech passes away. Her 2 sons pass away.
Mm-hmm.
And
so it's Naomi left with her 2 daughters-in-law who are Moabites, and she is in the land of Moab.
And their names are Ruth and Orpah. Yeah. So what does a good mother-in-law do? So Naomi looks at her 2 daughter-in-laws and says, "Stay here. I'm going to go back to my homeland."
Yeah, she says, "Stay with your moms." Her moms,
go marry,
get married again, have kids.
I'm too old to get married, so don't worry about me. I'm going to go back to my homeland.
Now it's interesting because already here you got little indications of something that's going to come up later on, because both daughters actually say, "No, we'll go with you." And she says, "Yeah, I'm too old to have more kids. What are you going to do? Wait for me to have another kid and then you'll marry that one?" Because that goes to this law that was within God's people
and some of the traditions. So that's part of why Naomi's like, "I can't have a kid. You're not going to wait 20 years to marry my other son." And, that seems creepy and weird, but a different world, different time.
Exactly.
But yeah, that's the scenario that they're in. And it's kind of interesting because they both daughters said no. Naomi, where you go, we will follow. We'll go with you.
Well, the famous line is coming.
Well, the famous line is coming, and then it's interesting because then she says, no. I'm telling you, stay. And then Orpah goes, okay. And Naomi goes, no. And this is the famous line: where you go, I'll
go.
Where
Ruth says this.
Yes, and where you stay, I'll stay.
We should probably read it here, shouldn't we?
Sure. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God.
And she actually says the word Lord there. So she even
Lord
uses the proper name for God, Yahweh.
Right. I always find that kind of interesting because Orpah was like, okay, I'll stay. And it's like, it's like when you're at a dinner table and you're like, no, I'll get the check. And you're like, no, I'll get the check. And then you're like, no, I'll get the check. And then it's at that point the other person says, okay, you can get the check.
Yeah.
How many times is it you're like, oh, I should have asked one more time. Right? I wish you would have said one more time. Then I wouldn't. So, she's like, oh, no, stay. And she's like, no, I'll follow you. No, stay. And then Orpah goes, okay, I'll stay. But Ruth, you could tell her dedication to her mother-in-law was really quite remarkable. You could tell it didn't matter how many times Naomi was going to ask. Ruth was not going to leave.
When Naomi saw she was determined to go with her,
right.
She said no more. So, I mean, it's obvious, in the tone, not just that one phrase, but from the tone and from that her commitment is high. And that, so, I mean, she's committed to Naomi as her mother-in-law. And there's some question there. People are like, oh, is this just a familial dedication, or is there some kind of dedication to the Lord as well?
Is there some sort of
it's got to be both at this
law
stage.
Or obligation? Is that what you're kind of thinking?
No, okay, maybe a little bit, but I guess what I was saying is a lot of times people will question at this stage whether or not Ruth really cares about God, or whether she's just like, no, I love my mother-in-law, so I'm going with her. And
I see what you're saying.
There's probably a spectrum or a continuum of things that are involved there, but
this
you
is
can't
okay.
take God out of it.
This is okay.
But there's going to be something growing there.
How many times do we know? I mean, we see this all the time in our own church when somebody will join or become Lutheran,
Why
let's
are
say,
they doing this, right?
And they become Lutheran because they married someone who's
Sure.
Lutheran and they want to honor that family and their family and their love for their spouse. But eventually, and I'll make it was part of why my dad became Lutheran. But eventually, you take hold of your faith as your own. But sometimes maybe it starts off as something different. And I would say that's it probably doesn't, because that's not really the focal point of the whole book. But you almost see that playing out
Absolutely.
Throughout the story of Ruth. Maybe the beginning of this is more of a dedication to Naomi. But eventually, the faith that is there is a faith that is Ruth's in the Lord.
There's a seed that's been planted that God grows. He waters and He makes into something through all the circumstances.
And that's okay. It's okay. Maybe it's no different than when we were kids. Why did I go to church? Because my parents made me, right? But eventually, that's something that becomes part of my own.
Yeah.
But there's sometimes maybe my motivation wasn't pure as I was a kid.
Sure.
But eventually, it gets there.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay. By the way. Sometimes parents will go,
I can't make my kid go to church.
I want them to choose. And I was like, what a dumb idea that is. Don't let your kids choose whether they want to go to church or not. Get the whip out, get the boot out, rip the covers off, drag them by their ears, and put them in church, right? But then they'll grow up and resent and hate it. Or they'll grow up and be apathetic to it altogether.
Yeah, exactly.
So
I've yet to see, many scenarios where the person said, well, I never made my kids to go to church, and they never did go to church.
And then they become the
faithful churchgoers. And then they also became the faithful churchgoers somehow, so yeah.
So it's hard. There's got to be a pull. Right?
Exactly.
You got to pull a rope.
It cannot only be, by the whip either.
Right, I agree.
Yeah. Okay.
So, all right, moving on. Good tangent, but tangent. So there it is. Ruth follows.
Yes.
So they go into back to their homeland, right? To Naomi's homeland. When they get there, people are like, "Is that Naomi?" Right?
Because Naomi and her family have obviously been gone for a long time because they had left during the famine. The family finally had relented. They come back. But one of the things that's interesting is Naomi's coming back and she's not like, "Oh, happy day."
No, she says, "Don't call me Naomi," which means.
Oh, I can't remember. I'm sorry.
We could ask Naomi. She told us in something like happy, blessed.
Mara means good. Bitter, right?
And then she says, "Call me Mara,"
yeah.
which means bitter. And she says, "Call me Mara. Don't call me Naomi anymore because I am bitter. So you can tell that she's really hurting. She's grieving, and she's bitter. Why is she bitter? Well, think about it. Her husband and her 2 sons just died.
And now she's going back to the land that she's essentially destitute.
Right. She has nothing.
Yeah.
And not only, and so the burden that Ruth took on for following is not just the burden she could have gone, found a husband, taken on a new great life, but instead she followed the tougher road. She took the tougher road, which was to follow Naomi. And as Ruth followed Naomi, she knew that she was going to also be destitute.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's always something theological. People are wondering about this. And, Naomi's obviously wondering at this point in time, too. What is this? Why have these things happened to me? People ask that question all the time. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why has this happened to me? And Naomi has this line, and I don't think this one's in there, but
there's a lot of this part.
I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?
And Naomi, you're going to have to look it up, and Naomi means something along the lines of blessed or full or something along those lines.
I'm trying to remember. Because
something positive.
I'm sitting here and trying to look through my notes.
That's why you don't want to call her Naomi anymore, because that's a positive name. She says, call me Mara instead, which means bitter.
Yep.
So what hope does a single woman have in these days, right? Not today, these days, but in those days, who has no one who can care for her. She has no opportunity for work or to provide or provision. And in those days, they were really left at the mercy of someone who would care for them. Mm-hmm. So what was left for them was gleaning. What gleaning is as they would harvest the field, they weren't able always to get all of the harvest, so they would allow people to go and glean the fields, to walk behind the harvest and pick what was left over and behind.
Correct. Yeah, so this was one of God's ways to provide for the poor, to provide for the widow, to provide for orphans.
Find that all the way in Leviticus.
It's in Leviticus. It says straight up, here's the way you're going to take care of people. You can glean, but not all the way to the edges. They had to leave kind of the edges of the field, and then you can't pick up that which you dropped. And so they're sitting there and cutting things and gathering things, and if it drops to the ground,
leave it there.
Leave it there. Your hands are off.
So the poor can come behind and have it.
And the foreigner, for that matter, too. Yes,
and so
sojourning through the land.
And so there you have. That's what Ruth. So Naomi has a connection. She has a cousin named Boaz, right, a relative.
Yeah.
Named Boaz, and so she says, "Go to Boaz and glean from his fields."
Yeah, go out to those ones. We know he's a pretty good guy.
He'll treat you well.
Yep.
And so that's what Ruth does. And so she gleans, and she gleans enough not only for her, but for Naomi as well, you would assume. And then, and so she's gleaning from the fields. She's not the only one. There's the foreman who's there and watching over them. Sometimes you could even say that treatment wasn't always that great, perhaps. And one of the things Boaz notices Ruth and says to the foreman, and this is what's not in here.
Yeah,
this
should be
not in the book.
Yeah.
Because I think it reads so great. The foreman says to, Boaz says to the foreman, treat her well and let her glean as much as she wants.
Yep.
Don't stop her, don't hinder her, don't hurt her, don't do anything, don't fire her, don't send her away.
So not only let her get what's rightfully, or legally allowed, but let her even go beyond that.
Right.
Like if she gets ahead of the guys a little bit, that's fine, and if she, make sure she's not harassed by anyone. This is a foreign woman, even though she's kind of with Naomi. Okay, she's a foreigner. That's the kind of person that in a lot of worlds would get taken advantage of, or something bad could happen to her in a field full of,
And so the foreigner, the sojourner, the poor would glean from one field, then they would go to the next field and glean. No. Naomi's advice to Ruth is stay here.
In that spot. Yeah,
this is a man who can take care of you. Stay here.
Well, and he even goes so far as so he's this wealthy man apparently, right? He's a wealthy man, looks out, sees her, and then what does he say about her? Why does he do that? I thought that was great. It says specifically, go take care of her because I've heard about her. Mm-hmm. What did I hear about her? And so this is this cool thing. Like when God's people are doing the right thing, it keeps taking care of them. All right? So Naomi is faithful, or Ruth is faithful to Naomi and comes to this land. Doesn't look like it's going to be rewarded right away. But then God says, okay, I've set things up so that you can glean or so you can get some food, right? Mm-hmm. And I've also set things up so that family takes care of family, right? And so Boaz looks and sees, not only is this person related to my family, but I heard that this Moabite woman came with Naomi through, when no other foreigner would do that. Why would anyone do that? There must be something special about that. And so I'm going to reward her faithfulness with giving her extra privileges, and then even sits down and has lunch with her. He cooks for her.
Yeah, the very next thing he says, come and eat with us at the table. No foreigner, no impoverished person, it's going to go and eat at the table with the landowner. And
he cooks for her.
All right, and he goes and he cooks for her. So Naomi ain't no fool. She's been around for a while, so she knows what's going on.
She says, this is a good sign. This man's got interest in you on a lot of levels, probably.
So this is kind of a fun... we won't get too deep into this. But,
okay, we got to talk about this a little bit then.
So what is Naomi's advice? Naomi looks at Ruth and says, Ruth, when he's laying down, go in.
So after they've threshed, okay?
After they're done working.
They're working all day, they're tired, they're laying down, okay?
Go and lay down by his feet.
Yes.
Is what it says.
Yes.
Okay.
This is controversial. Exactly.
So there's a dirty version and there's a clean version.
Exactly.
Okay? And which is right. So there are instances in the Bible where the word for feet means more than feet.
Okay, so there's multiple levels of double entendre.
Right, there
feet
is.
Feet can refer to a certain member of a man.
Right.
Okay. Lie down with, obviously, we understand, can have a couple of meanings, and uncovering or laying a blanket over it could be a sign of something else. Okay.
So all those things.
So some people read in this that Ruth basically goes in there and seduces him.
And says, Naomi's advice is, Ruth,
go in and seduce.
Go seduce Boaz.
Yeah, exactly.
And that way he will marry you and take care of you.
Exactly.
That was essentially. So could it be true? Could it not be? We like to probably people are uncomfortable with that because it implies maybe a certain sinful level of seduction.
So the question is this just God working through some kind of, even sinful interaction can be used? Or do we look at this and say, well, Ruth has been a pretty righteous person up to this point in time. Boaz has been, is seen as a righteous man who follows the law and even goes above the law. Plus, Boaz would have to realize he's about to offer Ruth to another man. And so if Ruth was found to be pregnant, that would be bad.
Right.
And so if he had taken advantage of that night, she could have been stoned or killed. So I tend to go with, this is probably supposed to be, this could be a seductive scenario, and Boaz doesn't do.
Yeah, it doesn't. Even if it was seductive, it doesn't imply that there was
any action,
or at least that action. So
the whole laying the blanket over my.
I was going to say,
you know about that?
Yeah,
talk about that.
In your study Bibles, it will often mention that the laying of the blanket or the uncovering of the feet was a request for marriage, essentially.
And there's a couple other places in the scriptures where it makes reference to
so that's not so which is it? Is it maybe all of the above? And that's, I think, a very possible thing.
Yeah.
Or is it purely a cultural reference of Ruth as regardless? Or did you know now you can say irregardless? They put that in the dictionary.
Don't do it.
Don't do it though. It doesn't make you sound intelligent. That's not a word. But so regardless. The point of the story is that Ruth is putting herself out there. Now, how much or how appropriate or inappropriate, I think the point of the matter is she is giving a strong indication to Boaz, I am here, if you would, please marry me.
Yes.
So Boaz picks up on this. This is not something that went past him or that he didn't pick up on.
Yeah.
But Boaz knows that there's some culture, some laws, and we started to talk about this, and I said, you know what, let's just continue this conversation in here.
Yeah.
Because there's some culture, there's some laws, we don't know which of which, that Boaz needs to take care of first. And one of which has to do with the land. Naomi rightfully has some land.
Correct.
But she does not have the right to own that land. So that land goes to the next of
to
kin.
Her next child, actually, but she's not.
But she doesn't have that.
Correct, exactly.
And so it would go to the next of kin, right?
Correct.
And
the closest living relative.
The closest living male relative.
Exactly. There you go.
Which is not Boaz. Boaz would be second in line. But we don't know if this is a Levitical thing or if this is a cultural thing. But whoever gets the land now has also an obligation to Naomi and also to Ruth therefore. So, so what do you think? What's going on?
Yeah, so the piece that we know of from the scriptures, is that if you look in the laws in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, there was an obligation, and we already talked about this a little bit at the beginning, there was an obligation that if a woman's husband died, then an unmarried brother-in-law would then be obligated to marry her and have kids so that the line continues, okay? But obviously the brother-in-law is dead, okay? So there's no one, and Naomi's not going to have more kids. And so the question is this supposed to be like an extension of that law, the Levitical law or something like that? Is this an extended reading of that where they say, okay, now the closest relative is supposed to take on Ruth? Or is this something that's more related to the land, that whoever gets the land, if they can, should marry this woman, this widow?
Just because society and culture sometimes tends to develop in a way that they support one another.
Exactly. Yeah. So here's supporting culture, or customs that uphold the spirit of the law. Maybe
wasn't the law, but upholds the spirit of the law.
Exactly.
Yeah. So either way, it doesn't matter. This is how it was laid out. I mean, and this is and Boaz recognizes this, and so Boaz goes to the closest of kin. I can't remember his name right now.
I don't think it even says his name.
So he goes to the closest of kin and says, and he doesn't trick him. He tells him the truth, but he describes it in such a way as to where the guy's like, oh, no, I don't want any of that.
Well, first he throws out the land, and the guy's like, yeah, I'll take the land.
Yeah, land.
Oh, by the way, you're going to have to marry this woman along with her.
There's this woman. She's got a foreign daughter-in-law that's following her around. It's really weird. You'll have to take care of both of them, too. What a burden. And the guy's like, no, I don't want the land.
Yeah. Well, that is one of the things. They mention, Ruth the Moabite.
Ruth
the Moabite. Through this whole story, she's always the Moabite, the foreigner, and it's included in there. And so you see the different reactions to the foreigner.
Like,
you got this guy who's like, no, and you got Boaz who's like, she seems like a worthy woman. She's a faithful woman. She's all those things. Boaz has eyes that go past nationality and go towards where's the heart.
Right. And so the man says, no, I don't. And so Boaz says, okay, I'll take this burden on myself. I'll take the land, and I'll take care of Naomi, and I'll take care of Ruth. And so then Boaz marries Ruth. It's really a cool story. It's a story of the faithfulness of Ruth. It's a story of the faithfulness and the love of a mother-in-law towards her daughter-in-law. But there's also what we would call Boaz as the Redeemer.
Yeah.
What does that mean? I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, what you've got is a couple levels of Redeemer then. So, and this is one of those types again, okay?
The Christ.
Exactly. A Christ-like typology that points forward. So you've got Boaz that redeems the land then.
Right.
So the land, remember, as a type points to God's people and their inheritance and their belonging to God. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so Boaz redeems the land. He takes care of the land. He keeps the land within the people and takes care of it. But you've also got him then redeeming Ruth in a sense too, taking care of a person who was going to the edges, and he brings her from the edges in, both by his actions and just taking care of a poor woman, but then of course by marrying her, he takes her from the edges and brings her all the way in. And that's a beautiful, beautiful type of Christ, not just like being like looking at us like you all are pitiful, all right? So, okay, I'll cover your sins and now just go on out. I mean, Jesus not only dies for us, but calls us family, calls us heirs, calls us brothers and sisters. Yeah. I mean, that is, that incredible graciousness of God.
It wasn't just an act of charity or servitude. It was a full incorporation into the lives of who we are, our lives into Him, and His life into ours. And it really is cool. And that's exactly what Boaz does. He doesn't just give charity to Ruth, but what he does is he takes her fully into his family and care and protection.
I love that it's all beyond obligation. That's part of what I love.
Beyond obligation.
Because there's what the law requires, and he could have been seen as a good and right man by only doing what the law required, but he goes beyond it. Ruth didn't even have a law obligating her to do anything, but just the cultural norms of the world back in that time would have said, oh, take care of your mother-in-law, mother-in-law's released you, mother-in-law's leaving your area. Maybe obligation almost more should have best been to just stay with your family or something like that in Moab. And she goes beyond the obligations. And one of the things that was pointed out in one text that I was reading was that this is the period of the judges. And we just read the book of Judges, and the people were awful, right? And so our image of Judges is all the people are awful, going after foreign gods constantly, and they can't live a right life for one moment. But then this story takes us inside that ear and says, oh, wait, there were faithful people then too.
Right.
So no matter how bad the world looks on a global scale, guess what? When you get into it, there are people that are trying to live and faithfully to God. And that as they try to live faithfully to God, He is faithful to them.
In the macro, there's maybe some problems. I mean, we can say this about our own society. I mean,
Exactly.
We watch the news, and in the macro,
we're like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, you say there's a lot of problems, and society's going to hell in a handbasket. Right?
And not every moment's going to be good. Remember what Naomi calls herself, Mara, right? For a second,
but if you look at the micro, I can show you many of people, many of families, many of communities, many of instances where even in our own context, people are very faithful, very good.
Absolutely.
You say, you know what, our world is not in a bad place. So.
And if we take care of each other, that builds us up. So, okay, here's where the world's going to hell in a handbasket, like you say. It becomes that much more incumbent within that faithful people care for other faithful people.
Do what God has called us to do.
Yeah.
If the faithful people live as the faithful people, we'll start to see the differences and the changes, at least in our own context.
Yeah.
And we'll make the changes that I think we want to make. But very good. Anything else?
Well, I mean, we can't. Yeah. We should make quick mention at the end, and I kind of got us offhand a little bit. I'm sorry, but we were going beautifully with typology, and then I jumped somewhere else.
Okay.
But it ends with the genealogy of David, right?
Okay.
And so just as Boaz points forward to Jesus Christ as the Redeemer, there's also the direct lineage right here, because Ruth marries Boaz, and then he's the great grandfather, if I remember correctly, of David, right?
Right. So you have Obed to Jesse, then to David.
Yes. Right. Yeah. Boaz, Obed, Jesse, David.
Right.
Yeah. And of course, Jesus is the son of David.
Yeah, no, it's great.
And so you got to look at that too.
So even the fact that the lineage not only continued, but from Boaz is, I don't know if sacrifice is the right word. I mean, but I mean it's part of it. But his mercy, generosity, redeeming, faithful actions, we find Jesus.
And it's cool too because you got a completely normal family. Mm-hmm. Most of our stories, it seems like it's these big, highfalutin people. It's kings. It's the people over everything. Right. I mean, Boaz is just another guy, within the world. Ruth isn't even just a guy. She's a woman, within this world. And so it's a beautiful thing to see God's story carried out in normal people in normal lives.
Perfect. All right. Very good. Thank you all very much.
Yeah.
Ruth, read it. I would encourage you to read the whole book.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's not much. How many chapters are there? 4?
4 chapters,
4 chapters. So, read the whole. You can just sit down and read that. It'll take you literally 5-10 minutes to read the whole book of Ruth, and then you can read all the fun details. I do think the details are fun that are missing from here about the foreman and all of that. So, blessings to you. We look forward to seeing you on Sunday, and
take care.
That's all we got.